Welcome, everybody, to Boston 9/11 Truth. Today is October 3rd, 2024, and today we have a returning guest speaker, Craig McKee. He last joined us late last fall, and today he is going to address the controversy over Lloyd England at the Pentagon. And so we're delighted he's returning to address this particular topic. I think everybody here is familiar with Craig McKee, but he has a number of blog spots, which I'll let him discuss. Sometimes I can't keep up with them all. Yeah, but take it over, Craig.
Hey, well, thank you, Susan. Thank you, everybody, for having me. Yeah, I guess, I have two blogs. I won't go into the story of why there are two instead of just one, but let's just say it has to do with Google and their algorithms and that sort of thing. But so I have a blog called Truth and Shadows that I've had since 2010. And I started a new one last year called Thought, Crimes and Misdemeanors, which is a Substack page. And they're just kind of neat features that Substack offered that I just thought would make life easier, like people being able to subscribe and that sort of thing. So that's kind of why I decided to start a new one. But they're both still operational. And I do have I've also been doing some YouTube videos, although I haven't done very many in the last few weeks. And I have don't have a lot of subscribers, so it's really hard to kind of get a foothold. But I'll get on that at some point. But on Truth and Shadows, some years back, I did a pair of articles on the Lloyd England thing, two of them. And I think those links were included with the announcement of this. So if anybody wants, if anybody finds that this is a lot of information in a short period of time, and they kind of want to look it over at their leisure, those two articles pretty much have everything in there that I have to say on the matter. So now what I'm going to do, it's a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to do. So I'm hoping this is going to work, because I'm now going to go to PowerPoint and then I'm going to hit slideshow. And I'm going to close. Okay, I've got one thing I'm going to close. Now,
Craig,
I have to share my screen, right?
Correct. But while you're
Okay.
setting that up, I just wanted to preface that I've muted everybody, and I missed one there, so that Craig will not be interrupted. If you have a question, you can raise your hand, and then you can be unmuted. But I just need to do that to avoid any interruptions in a presentation. And that was my interruption.
That's fine. Yeah, feel free to jot down a note if you want, because I know sometimes it's easy to forget when you're hearing something and you're not clear on something, and then by the time the Q&A comes around, you may have forgotten it. So feel free to make a note or whatever. So I'm gonna go to share my screen, and there. So we're all seeing that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so now I'm going to go. Okay, now I'm going to attempt to go to the slideshow feature, and hopefully this will go off without a hitch. There we go. Does everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Okay. Great. So, yeah, this is I called the talk the Lloyd England evidence, why it matters and why it's being suppressed. I mean, in essence, it's being suppressed because it purports to support the official story, and I will try to lay out a case for why it fails to do that. So yeah, here we have taxi driver Lloyd England says that early on September 11th, he was told by two customers of his cab. He drove a cab in the Washington, D.C. area. He actually passed away a couple of years ago. I think he was 84 or something when he passed away. So he's not around, but he certainly was for many years after 9/11. So he said that he decided that he was going to go home so he wouldn't be in the middle of what was happening, which is a very odd thing for somebody to say based on something that happened in New York City, and he's in Washington. But in any case, that's what he says. So he says he was driving south on Route 27, and I'll have an image for you in a moment too, so you can kind of situate yourself. When he saw a low-flying plane crossing the highway in front of him, a split second before a large light pole crashed through his windshield. And it's sort of, you'll see in the photograph that it's kind of goes in through like the middle of the windshield. Now, this is a useful photograph of the Pentagon. And if what you'll see is, if you do you see where the white arrow is pointing? That's the Navy Annex building. And in the yellow circle, that's the Citgo gas station. Both of these have been torn down, but they're useful in terms of kind of orienting yourself in terms of the what the official claim is. The official flight path requires that the plane is entirely not only to the left in this picture of the Navy Annex, but to the left, completely to the left of the road that runs alongside the Navy Annex, which is called Columbia Pike. So that kind of gives you a kind of an idea. So in other words, the plane would have been coming towards us in this photograph. So now the reason, and I always point this out when I talk about the Pentagon, is the reason it's so important, I think, and why it shouldn't be sort of shoved aside, is because it's the one area that absolutely, if we can show the staging of evidence or essentially a faked plane crash, which is what I argue, that proves government involvement, because nobody else would be able to take control of that scene. And that's the point I make in that. Nobody could have staged the crime scene. And there was a lot of staging, I believe, that went on. Now, this is just, I think some people that really have a good memory might remember this particular slide from last fall, but I threw it in there again just as kind of a refresher. So that I argue that internal explosives were used, that the video was faked, that the damage was staged, and plane debris planted. And then there were actual witnesses that I'm going to talk about. So here's kind of a summary of what the official story claims about the plane being hijacked, flown to the west, and then being turned around and flown back. Excuse me. It's supposed to have made a 270-degree spiral descent. And then after hitting 5 light poles without any apparent damage to the wings of the plane, it's supposed to have hit the Pentagon, the side of the Pentagon, at 530 miles per hour. And all this is supposed to have been done by Hani Hanjour, an alleged hijacker who couldn't even rent a 2-seater Cessna because his flying skills were too poor. So now I just threw this into as just a refresher. This is a composite photo that was made of the damage to the Pentagon building, just to show you. So it's kind of a combination of 2 or 3 photos, because there was always like foam being shot at the building, and it was very hard to get a clear look at the whole damage at once. But you can clearly see with each of those windows are 10 feet apart. So you're looking at an opening of, maybe 80 to 90 feet in total, but a clear opening, not more than 50 feet, without some columns still being at least partially intact. So now included in the evidence against the 757 impact are some key witnesses who placed the plane on the north side of the Citgo gas station. And if you think back to that photo I just showed you, that would be to the right of that yellow circle in the picture. And to the right It will either just over the edge of it to the right or completely to the right of it. There were a little bit of variety, but they all the people, and this is the interview, the subjects that were interviewed by Citizen Investigation Team, which was a duo from California, Aldo Marquis and Craig McKee, who basically flew across the country and decided they were going to go around and try to interview people who had seen the plane. And what they found is that they found all these people who didn't know each other, had no connection to each other, who described a flight path that just simply is incompatible with the evidence, with the damage. The light poles, the whole thing. So now this is a photograph looking kind of from the Navy Annex back the other way. And you can see right in the foreground, there's the Citgo station. The red line is the official flight path. And you can see the 5 little yellow things, that's the light poles. And so this is, the light poles really make that path. It can't vary. There is not much room for variance there, because otherwise it wouldn't have hit all the poles. The blue line is just an example of what some of the witnesses that CIT interviewed described, which was something to the north of the station and then banking to the right. Let's see. So that's pretty much, yeah. So there were the Pentagon Air Traffic Controller, Sean Boger, was one of the people that they interviewed. 2 Pentagon cops, William Legacy and Chadwick Brooks, an employee of the gas station, Robert Tercios, and several employees of the Arlington National Cemetery. The cemetery, by the way, is located immediately to the north of the Navy Annex and the gas station. So if people at the cemetery described the plane going right over their heads, as some of them did, that is a north path approach, and it is incompatible with the official story. Also, the flight data recorder, they did an animation, and the National Transportation Safety Board did an animation based on the flight data recorder that showed the plane actually on the north path, and also too high to hit the Pentagon. And they've never corrected, they've never changed that. They've never said, oops, we goofed. We've got to fix that. They've never changed it. Now, this is an aerial photograph. And you can see there's the Navy Annex on the left, and right in the middle, that vantage number 4 is where the gas station was. And then you can see where it says cab here. That's where Lloyd England's cab was allegedly hit. Now, if their accounts are truthful, and I mean the interview, the North Path witnesses, if their accounts are truthful, then the damage path could not have been created by a 757 or any other aircraft. It had to have been staged. Now, Lloyd England explains that he was traveling south. So that means past the west face on the west side of the Pentagon, traveling south towards the Navy Annex. When this pole, he describes it impaling his cab, and he describes it at different times as being anywhere from 30 to 40 feet long, and going right through the center of the windshield and damaging the passenger seat and the back seat. And I've got photographs to show you shortly on that. So the reason why this is important, the reason why Lloyd England is an important part of the cover-up, I would argue, is that his story supports the official flight path, because if the poles really were knocked down, that would confirm the official flight path. Also, the 5 light poles being knocked down confirms the wingspan of the plane and the altitude shortly before the alleged impact. So that's why it kills several birds with one stone there. Now, here's just a picture of Lloyd on the highway. You can see the damage to the windshield, and you can see the Pentagon in the background, and it's kind of looking diagonally. So he's he's well south of the Pentagon in this photograph, but it's kind of looking back at an angle on where the damage is. Now here, this is, hold on, I'm just gonna, all right. It's funny, this cuts off the top like inch of the screen, so I have no idea what the first line of that says, but basically this shows the position of the taxi, approximate, and the path that the plane would have taken into the Pentagon. And you can see where I have an arrow. Well, I have an arrow pointing to the taxi, but also another arrow pointing at the pole that Lloyd England describes as having hit his cab. It's the first pole, and it is hit by the right wing. And you'll see that's where one of the controversies arises. I don't think it should be a controversy, but we'll see it. We'll see that in a moment. So he said he narrowly escaped death. And then he fought for control of the car for something like 150 feet, finally coming to rest with the pole sticking out over the windshield. And it's quite interesting that he ends up back where the base of the pole was to start with. So then things get strange. England, so he stops, he's pointing to the side of the road with his car, and he flags down a stranger, although he, in one interview, referred to the guy as a friend and then later as a stranger. But this person in a white van, he flags him down, and without saying a word, the other man helps him remove this pole from the cab. Now, the pole, as CIT found out by going to the Virginia Department of Transportation, that pole weighs 247 pounds. So I don't know how good, what good condition Lloyd England was in at 68, but I'm not sure that I would be up to that, and I'm a little bit younger. But so that's his story about now as we'll see later, the idea that he even felt the need to pull it out of the car is pretty odd. But anyway, so they pulled it out of the car, but you can see that the pole is lying on the road, kind of parallel to the side of the road. It's laid down in the direction of traffic, which would mean that they would have had to pull it out, and they would have been almost on the shoulder of the road, and then they would have had to turn it all the way around and basically carry it back into the center of the road, which is very strange. And I'll show you a photograph that indicates that that's not how the pole got there. So he did several interviews, and I think I believe that like a lot of people, that England, and the people perhaps that if he was put up to this, the people that did that, they probably didn't count on these two guys from California going out there and questioning them, because England did several television interviews, and he gave his straightforward account, and nobody really questioned it. But then Ranke and McKee went out there and did speak to him. Now, this gives you an idea of how tall the tail is. This is the pole, and you can sort of note the position. Like, just imagine if that pole was sticking over the hood of that car. Imagine how weird it would be to not only pull it out, but to then kind of carry it to the center of the road. And I think the obvious answer is that never happened. This was just a staged scene. Now, he says he fell with the pole on top of him, but the stranger didn't help him. But if he fell, then before it was moved to its final location, how did that happen? And he actually said at one point, he said that he fell down because there was a loud explosion at the Pentagon. But later, in later accounts, he stopped mentioning the explosion. So that's a kind of an odd inconsistency in his story that changed over time. Now this here we see a photograph. That's Lloyd on the left, and that's a guy named Russell Pickering on the right, who went with the CIT guys. He was part of the gang that went to Washington. I don't think he's necessarily very highly thought of by them anymore, because I think he sort of did a flip and started taking the opposite position. But in this case, you see in one of the CIT videos that he's discussing with Lloyd how the pole was pulled out. And Lloyd describes standing in front of the car and him and the other gentleman pulling the pole out. Now, this is very hard to believe, because if you actually were trying to pull a pole like that out of the car, which I don't even think you could, if it was still sticking up, I think you would have a very hard time. But you would go around the side of the car, I think, and one on each side, and try to do it that way. But he claims they were both in front of the car, and we'll see here now. Okay, so CIT, they interviewed England in 2006, and then they put out, I think, a couple of a video. I'm not sure what order and these videos came in exactly, but they went back to interview him a second time after he already knew, England already knew how they had handled him the first time. And so, his wife, when they knocked on the door, his wife, Shirley, kind of said, "Oh, no, not you guys again," kind of thing. But if I were a little bit more technically advanced, I would have had some clips from these videos for you, but, maybe another time. So now here's again the front-on view. I would just speculate a little bit about, the damage to this windshield, whether that's possible that would have been created by something just going through that opening. But I'm not an expert on that, but I would question it a little bit. So here's a quote from Kevin Barrett, who I'm sure you all know. "Accusing cab driver Lloyd England is a misnomer. England accuses himself through the massive internal and external contradictions in his testimony." And here's Craig McKee, who says, "Never have we accused Lloyd England of willingly being involved in this operation, because we don't know that and we can't prove it. He could, in fact, be a victim who was coerced on some level or manipulated on some level, which would in essence make him a victim who was forced to be involved in this event." Now, to the light poles. Here are all 5 poles. Now, the one in the top left is the one that England describes as hitting his car. The other 4 all fell fairly close to their base, which I think is very suspicious in the sense that if you have a plane flying at 530 miles per hour, it seems to me either those poles are going to be knocked a great distance, or they're going to rip through the wing that where the contact is. The idea that all that kinetic energy could just result in no damage to the wing, and yet the pole's just falling over, just doesn't seem believable to me. Now, this is a very, very key point, and I've actually not really heard anybody else say this, but I think it makes logical sense. As you saw in that photo that I showed you before, that looking straight down, the hole that England describes would have been hit by the right wing, and it would have been knocked sort of somewhat forward and somewhat to the right, but somehow it ends up way to the left and 150 feet up the road. I would argue that that just can't be, because, well, for one thing, why would the wing knock it in that direction? But secondly, the plane's fuselage would be directly in the path of the pole. So I think this is, I started making this point some years back, and the people who are arguing for the complete truthfulness of Lloyd's account, who originally agreed it was the long base of pole number 1, they did a switch, and they started claiming it was pole number 2. Which was allegedly hit by the left wing. I'm sorry. So we'll get into that more here. Now, okay, so there's the image I was just telling you about. You can see the angle of the wing, and I don't know that this is a precise depiction of a 757, but you get the idea. The pole would have gone somewhat forward and somewhat to the right. It would not have flown over the fuselage or under the fuselage and head towards the taxi. Hold on, sorry, folks. Forgot to turn my phone off. So there's that. So physically impossible, I would argue. I don't think there's any doubt about it. Now, so close to the bases, I made that point. It's just awfully convenient that the only pole that didn't land right by its base is the one that hits Lloyd's cab and then ends up, by the time he gets control of the car, right back at its base again anyway. Now, this is important. Nobody says they saw any of this. Nobody saw anything hit the cab. Nobody saw him swerving around with the pole sticking out, which is kind of hard to believe if it really happened. And no one saw them removing a pole from the car. Now, this is very important. I hope you can all see this. I hope you've all got, your screens will allow you to see this. But at the bottom of this image, which is looking kind of north on Route 27, you can see where I have the two arrows there. There's a scratch, or what appears to be a scratch, going straight across the road. And the scratch ends right at the corner of the base of that pole. So it appears to me that pole was dragged into place. It would be it's a heck of a coincidence if that's not the case. But I would argue that that's likely how the pole ended up there. It was probably lying on the side of the road. And it's funny, people will often say, like, well, wouldn't somebody have seen it? But the reality is, if you're driving down the highway and you see a light pole lying down on the side of the road or on the grass or something, you're not going to really think, you're going to think they're either in the process of putting it up or repairing it or whatever. You're not going to sort of immediately think, that somebody's trying to stage a crime scene. So now we're going to get into what I think I quite cleverly call the magic pole theory. It's kind of a little play on JFK, if that's not obvious. So here's kind of a sort of a bit of a closer up shot of what the end of the pole looks like. Now, of course, that bend is exaggerated by the fact that it's a telephoto shot, so it kind of makes it look like it's much more of a bend in it than it really is. But you can sort of see what the end of that looks like. Now, here's the back seat of Lloyd's cab, and I have circled what he claims is the hole made by that pole after it impaled his cab after being hit at 530 miles per hour. I would argue that that's absolutely not credible, that a pole making contact with that seat would make that hole. I don't think that's even possible. Now, here's a photo. This was taken by his wife the day after 9/11. And you can see the passenger seat, which is what we're looking at. And the front passenger seat is kind of bent back at the corner, but there's no tears in the upholstery at all. It's just bent. But still, the hole in the back seat is behind this seat. So there's no how the pole could bend this back and not tear it, and then make that other hole. I mean, I think this is all just like crazy, honestly. Now here's a picture of Lloyd when CIT went back to interview him in 2008. They actually drove up. He had the thing. He never drove it after 9/11, and he had it stored up at his country property. And they drove up there and took a look at it. So he had kept it and hadn't driven it again. Now here's a shot that they took then. So this is 7 years after the other shot. So you can still see the the seat bent back the way it was, and you can still see how difficult it would be for a pole to do that and still make it down to the bottom of that back seat to make that hole. Now, this is also really important. This is a CIT picture, and I put no hood damage on the top, but the other two things are from their own image. Now you can see there's what appears to be, and what England described was the weight of the pole making that indent in the dashboard. But the problem is, look at the edge of the hood. It's considerably higher, and it doesn't have a scratch on it. So the idea that he could be driving around for 30 or 40 or whatever seconds with this thing bouncing around, sticking out of the car without touching that hood, is just, like, to me, just not even credible. So now he describes at one point that he explains this by saying that the pole entered the cab on something like a 45-degree angle. But that's not credible either, because if it came in at a 45-degree angle, it would have gone right through that front seat, and probably right through the back seat and right through the floor of the car too. But in any case, certainly wouldn't have bent back the front seat. So the supposed damage to the interior of the cab does not support England's account. In fact, I would argue that it disproves it. Now, this is a key point, which is going to lead into where the controversy comes in. The controversy that shouldn't even be a controversy. Which pole did England actually say hit his cab? Now, was he clear about which pole it was? Absolutely, he was. He describes this pole, and you'll see in another image I'm going to show you in a minute that there's a short part of the second pole that others have argued is what actually was in the cab. So, so this is, the reason why this is important is because it really kills the official story. He's very clear about which pole it is, as you'll see in a minute, and that really kills his story for the reasons that I said before about the fact that there's just no way that pole could have gotten from the right side of the plane 150 feet to the left. So now here's an image that shows, if you see on the left, and there's another image coming, but he's asked directly if it's the long pole, and he says yes. And that little sticking it into the left part of the frame there is the short end of the pole that others are arguing it really, really hit. So England tells us over and over that it's the long piece of the pole. He told both CIT and Jeff Hill that it was between 30 and 40 feet long. Yes. So that can only be one pole. There's that length, there can't be any ambiguity. But if we need even more clarification than that, we get it in one of the CIT videos in Eye of the Storm, which I mentioned earlier. They actually ask him that. They show him a photograph. I mean, you have to take your hat off to these guys for going to the lengths that they went to. And instead of them being vilified and being attacked and called fraudulent as they are by certain people, to me, they should be honored by our movement. Anyway, so there you can clearly see, he says, this is the pole there. I think that's what's hiding behind the thing at the top of the screen. So you can see right there, his finger's pointing right at the long pole. And that's the photograph, just flipped around. Now, why does it matter? Well, we're going to find out why it matters. Because if he identifies the long base of the pole, then that means his story is false. And it seems like those who want to argue that Flight 77, a 757, really did travel on the official path, really did hit the building, just as the government has been saying all along. It's necessary to argue that that it wasn't that first pole. Now, I want to go. Yeah, I'm going to go into the other arguments, and the two main people that are doing the arguments are David Chandler and Wayne Costey. And I just want to make a point here. Everything I'm going to say is fact. I'm not going to talk about them personally. It's fact. And I look forward to if anybody thinks that I have misinterpreted what they've said or mischaracterized it, please say so. Please tell me. I would like to hear it, because I don't think it is a problem if legitimate criticism shouldn't be a problem, in my opinion, if it's based on facts. So after this, you'll tell me if you think that I'm being fair or not. Now, they have pushed the claim for I don't know how many years it is now, 5 or 6 or whatever years, that it was the top arm of pole number 2 that hit the plane, because clearly it's not possible that the first pole did it. And here we have a photograph that this is one of the official, I think this is from the Moussaoui trial, and you can see the circled pole is the one that Costey and Chandler allege actually hit the cab. And it's about 11 and a half feet long, apparently. So now, but this is only a recent position that they have come to. For many years, they asserted it was the long part of the pole. And, I have a theory as to why they made that change, which I'll mention on a future slide here. But they mentioned they did a paper rebutting or going after Barbara Honegger in 2016, and you can see the authors of the paper are there. And in that paper, they clearly identified the long base of pole number 1 as being the one that did the damage. And this is a shot. The white part there is straight from their paper. So you can see they're showing the pole, and you can see which pole they're showing. It's the one that Lloyd pointed to in that photograph. Now, my question would be, if they felt that the physical evidence aligned with it being a long base of the pole for a number of years in multiple different papers, why did they suddenly? Why is it now that it doesn't match the damage? What changed? We don't know. So. And John Wyndham on a forum I came across years back just made a comment that it was proven that it was the shorter section of the pole, which of course it's not. It's just alleged. So yeah, it seems that their concern is trying to reinforce the official flight path. So now in an interview that David Chandler did. With, I think this was the one that he did with a guy named J.M. Talbot, John Michael Talbot. He said, as Wayne Costey has pointed out, there is nowhere in any of the CIT's videos that Lloyd England unambiguously identifies that long 25-foot piece as the piece that he's not claiming that's the piece that hit his car. But he does. And you'll see if you read my 2 articles, you'll see even more elaborate documentation of that fact. Now here's Wayne Costey on the listserv of the 9/11 and other deep state crimes teleconference, saying that apparently CIT forgot to question Lloyd about how long the pole is. And then right below we have a quote from the CIT video Eye of the Storm, where Ranke directly does exactly that. How long do you think the pole was, approximately? And he responds, it's 30 to 40 foot long. And then 2 years later, he's interviewed by Jeff Hill, and he tells Jeff Hill it was about 40 feet long. And these are just a few examples of many where they ask him over and over again, was it the long base of the pole? It's absolutely beyond question that that's the case. Now, I'm not saying that it was the long end of the pole that hit the cab. I'm saying England is alleging that it's that pole. So, he also specifies that it was the thinner, lighter top that was inside the cab and the heavier base that was sticking out. So this again supports the idea that it's the long end, because the top arm didn't really have a thicker base or a thinner, so it's quite clear he's talking about the long pole. Now, this is where things get worse. Is they're actually, not only are they saying he didn't say this, but they're saying he actually was trying to say the opposite, and they kind of forced him to. They kind of put words in his mouth and bullied him. And for that, you really need to see. You really need to see the video. But there is an issue of confusion in the video, and I'm going to show you what it is. Because in the video, England was looking at a photograph, and the photograph showed his cab on the bridge, which is the bridge. They call it the bridge, but it's really an underpass where Columbia Pike goes under Route 27. That's where the cab was. And Lloyd, for some reason, says, no, that wasn't where I was. I was way north of that. Like, he's talking about hundreds of feet, if not hundreds of yards, like more beside the Pentagon. And the CIT guys are saying, no, like, look at the picture. There you are. You're right. You're right there on the bridge. And he kept saying, no, I wasn't on the bridge. No. And then at one point they pointed and they said, that's the pole, right? Meaning that's the pole that's right on the bridge. And Lloyd hesitates, and he's trying to sort of puzzle it out, it looks like. And this has been described by David Chandler as him trying to say it's not his pole, but them not accepting it. But it's nothing to do with that. What it had to do with was him saying, I wasn't in that spot. He never questioned which pole it was. In fact, as I pointed out before, he specifically identifies the long pole. So I take great issue with that. That comment by David Chandler. I'm trying to be nice. So Ranke tries repeatedly to confirm the location of the damaged taxi. And so this is what I just explained, but it's really obvious that he's not arguing with which pole it was. Now, and this is in 2017, this is now 9 years after the second England interview. And David Chandler says, I don't think he did identify the long base of the pole. And it doesn't appear that he did in the videos. However, even if he did, he's just wrong. He's in error, because we know he could not have been hit by any part of the first light pole. Now, that's a very peculiar conclusion, I think, because it just assumes that England is being truthful at all times. So here's a quick thing that shows a couple more examples of where he's asked, and he says, like, yes, the base that attached to the ground, the whole deal. Again, confirming the length, sticking out across the hood, and all that. So Chandler argues that he's telling the complete truth, and he attacks CIT researchers and calls them fraudulent, and it says they were kind of doing their best to deliberately confuse him, and as they were, and in doing so, talking like fast-talking telemarketers. Now, here we're back to this photograph again. Here's the quote from the PowerPoint series that Chandler and Costi did. In the rear seat, there are some holes consistent with the lower support arm being the impinging projectile. Well, again, I would just point you to that photo and say, how can that be described as some holes? Now, here's a doodle, I guess you'd call it, that Lloyd himself drew of what happened. And this has really been latched onto, particularly by Wayne Costi, to say, well, look how short the pole is. He couldn't have been describing the long base of the pole. But I hardly think this is sort of intended to be scientifically accurate. And plus, if you want to nitpick, you can say that the pole extends beyond the end of the car anyway, which clearly is incompatible with an 11-foot pole. But it's just a doodle, and I really don't think it should be taken as, it's not to scale, let's say. So, this is kind of the key point. They just don't even consider the possibility that the story is not truthful. they just think, well, it couldn't be the first poll, therefore it must be the second poll, which I don't think makes much logical sense. Now, it's interesting. It could be, this could be a coincidence, but when I started making the point about how the right wing couldn't have knocked the first poll to the left, it seemed like, that was around the time when they started arguing that it was actually the second poll. That could be coincidence, I suppose. Now, this is, and I threw this in, I think I showed you this last time, so I don't have to dwell on it, but basically here's a quote from Craig McKee where Wayne Costi on his website removes the part in white and just starts the sentence with a capital W and says, well, which makes it sound like he's actually saying that it wasn't the long poll. And he has yet to correct that. That's been up for years now, and he hasn't corrected it. Now, so just to sum up, the problem with their claims, they refuse to acknowledge that he repeatedly identified the long base of poll 1. They falsely claimed that England disagreed when Ranke pointed to the poll. They refused to acknowledge that England's apparent confusion concerned his location, not which poll he was talking about. And they refused to acknowledge that the alleged damage just simply isn't compatible with a poll of that size being impaling the cab after being hit. So those are my concerns with them. Now, there are some other things about the England story, and we're getting close to the end here. But there are some other oddities in England's story that are worth noting here. He and his wife Shirley, on repeated occasions, made reference, or they were asked about the fact that he said his wife worked for the FBI, and she said the same thing. And they even at different occasions even kind of said, well, we can't talk about it. We can't talk about what she does there. It's just as if it's kind of classified or something. And as we'll see in a minute, it turns out she was a cleaner in the building at the FBI. Now, here's a quote from Lloyd. He says, the FBI interviewed me because my wife works for the FBI. They assumed I'd been killed by looking at the car on the inside. They were not in a big hurry. That wasn't what they were looking for. It wasn't that they were looking for me. They didn't really see a need to try and find me because looking at the car, they figured I hadn't survived it. Now, that's a very bizarre thing to say when there's no body in the car, or blood for that matter. Now, Shirley explains in 2008, she says, the FBI thought he had been killed, but I told them he was alive. But, why? First of all, why would they even speak to her? How would they even know that cab belonged to somebody whose wife worked as a cleaner? How would they even manage to figure that out? And then I have a note there at the bottom that talks about the fact that it's very odd that he never drove his cab again, even though it seemed like the damage didn't seem like it would have precluded having some repairs done. But he bought another cab, same model, but 5 years newer. And then later on made the comment that he was thinking of selling one of the two cabs. Well, if he was going to sell the first cab, you'd think he would have done it before it sat on his country property for 7 years. So anyway, now here's a quote. This is kind of weird. CIT was interviewing Lloyd in the car, and they had the camera going, I guess, but Lloyd was not aware of it. And he makes some very interesting statements. He says, one thing about it you got to understand, when people do things and get away with it, eventually it's going to come to me. And when it comes to me, it's going to be so big I can't do nothing about it. So it had to be stopped in the beginning when it's small, you see, to keep it from spreading. And he adds, I wasn't supposed to be involved in this. It's too big for me, man. This is a big thing. Man, this is a world thing happening. I'm a small man. My lifestyle is completely different from this. I'm not supposed to be involved in this. This is for other people who have money and all this kind of stuff. And that's a pretty interesting statement, too, because you wouldn't think if it was Muslim terrorists that had carried out 9/11, you wouldn't necessarily think that he would describe them as people with money. But he did. Now, to conclude here, I've just kind of compiled a list of unanswered questions, and I don't know that I need to necessarily read all of them, but you can see these are things that I have touched on throughout the presentation. The damage to the hood, the lack of damage to the hood, lack of damage to the seat, um, how the pole could have gotten from one side of the plane to the other. I'll make this, for those who are interested, I'll make this PowerPoint available. So if people want to take their time and look at it, they're welcome to do so. Um, so why would he even pull out in the first place? That doesn't really make any sense. Why would he pull it out from the front? Why would the stranger be a silent stranger? And he kind of used that "it was so quiet" line more than once, so it kind of sounded like a bit of a, he thought that added some atmosphere to the story or something. And it's actually one thing I didn't mention in any of the slides that I think is worth pointing out, or I'm not sure if it comes up in one of these, but Lloyd actually doesn't. Lloyd actually questions whether the plane hit the building. He actually doesn't think it hit the building. So that's kind of an interesting little wrinkle on top of everything else. Um, yeah, his survivors fund account didn't really line up with the interviews. The whole thing about why would the FBI think he was dead is very strange. And the thing about the FBI, again, you can see all this after. Now, that just to reinforce this thing about him being on the bridge, on camera, this whole thing took place on camera where he's saying to the CIT guys, "No, I wasn't there. No, I wasn't there." But they had audio going at one point when the cameras were not rolling. And on that audio, Lloyd clearly says that the photographer was up on the bridge. Well, these photographs are clearly taken. The photographer was close to the car when he took, he wasn't hundreds of feet away. So, in other words, on camera, he's saying, "I wasn't on the bridge." And off camera, he's saying, "Yeah, essentially, I was on the bridge." So, his claim is not even very credible there. And then, so basically, the facts are clear, I would argue. Lloyd England's story wasn't a mistake. It was a false statement fabricated to sell the official story. So that's it, folks. That's my thing here. And I will unshare. How do I do this? Stop share.
Yeah, stop share. Thank you. That was quite extensive. We are having difficulties with our webmaster getting our videos published. So that people don't have to wait to see your presentation, I would ask you to send your presentation to me, the PowerPoint, and I will share it with everyone.
Sure.
Okay.
Yes, that would be.
Yeah, because it's now a couple of months since we've been able to upload any videos because I'm a dummy. I don't know how to do it myself. And I'm depending on our webmaster who has been sick and had eye problems for over a month now. So that would be very helpful. Thank you. So I'm going to open up the floor to questions. I do have one question myself. What do you think did cause the damage to the cab? Yeah,
Yes, a good question.
hammer or something, or
That's a yeah. That's a hard one to answer, and I don't really have a good. I mean, obviously, I believe it was staged to look like it had been hit by a pole. Although you'd think they would have done a better job of staging the inside. That's but
and the hood.
But 9/11. I mean, aren't there a bunch of examples of things that you'd think that they could have done a better job on in terms of creating the deception? So I don't know what they would have used. I don't know. I mean, is this something that could have been done in advance and sort of somehow hidden and then unveiled? I don't know, because you can't just obviously start pounding on a windshield right in the middle of the highway with all these cars on the other side. So I'm not sure. I mean, I'm open to theories on that. So yeah, I mean, there is a a particular researcher who I strongly disagree with, who thinks that the cab actually was well to the north and was actually hit by a pole, um, and that somehow it was transported to the final spot. But at the same time, this person claims that Lloyd was totally being honest. So I'm not sure how Lloyd and his car would be transported hundreds of feet without him being conscious that that's what was happening. So I don't buy that theory. But so I don't really have a good answer for you
Oh, Maxwell
about
has
what.
put in the chat, probably drove into a horizontal pole like a gate, and then drove the cab to the scene at the time.
Well, I guess that could have happened, but it's certainly, if that happened, then that clearly would reveal that Lloyd was making up a story then, because clearly he does not. That's not the story he tells.
Right.
So I couldn't say that's not possible.
Well, you're asking how it was staged. That's just one idea. I mean, it's not so hard to do.
I would agree. I would agree that it's that I'm sure the government, with all its resources, has got some ability to pull that off, I would think.
Al has his hand raised.
Yeah, were there any witnesses to the pole going into the cab outside of Lloyd? In other words, if there were cars going the other way, has anybody stepped forward and presented their witnessing anything like that? Or, I mean, it seems
No.
odd that there was just no one there except him.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a whole other area that I haven't really gotten into in any depth, is how he, how his car is so alone on the highway. It seems like at some point, and it would be interesting to figure out exactly when, at some point, they were routing traffic off of that southbound road. But then you still have the northbound traffic that would be right beside. So, no, I have not heard of anybody who says that they saw the cab hit by a pole, that they saw the pole being taken out of the cab. Not one person describes any of that.
Interesting.
Very interesting. That was another question I had. What kind of traffic normally at that time of day is there on that stretch of road? Yeah.
Well, it was 9:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
So, and it was like bumper to bumper traffic, because there were several media people that just happened to conveniently be located. There were like 6 employees of USA Today that were caught in traffic right near the Pentagon, and CIT interviewed some of them too. One of them being Mike Walter, who kind of famously, he described in one account, he talks about the plane hitting the building and the wings being like sucked in and then being pulled in. But then on another account, he talks about the fact that the plane went behind some trees before it hit the building. So, I don't think he's very credible either. And he actually got so much flack for his initial statement that he actually went on, and this is not, he worked for USA Today, but for the TV part of it, not the newspaper. And so he actually went on and kind of gave set the record straight kind of a thing. And it's pretty weird. He keeps looking to the side, like he's trying to do it's like he's doing a caricature of a guilty guy, sort of like, doing this. It's very strange, but it's like, Mike, you're not making yourself look more credible by looking side to side as if you're waiting for somebody off camera to whack you with a ruler or something. So.
All right, Rebecca has her hand raised.
I was just, my question's really related to the same thing you were just talking about like, is there any evidence that the road was closed before the cab got there? Like there's some type of problem with this whole idea that nobody saw his cab or saw this happening. It seems very weird.
Yeah.
And I wonder if the road
Yeah.
was actually shut down first and then they sort of quickly got the cab. I don't know that, of course.
Right.
So, do you know, I
Yeah.
don't know if you said this, but do you know how fast he was traveling? Like how fast his taxi was going?
Yeah, he says like 40 to 50 miles per hour. That's
Also very
what he
unlikely
described.
that he wouldn't be injured. I mean, he wasn't badly injured, right? Which
Well, he
seems
wasn't injured at all.
seems
He,
strange
he,
to
he
me.
kept making the point whenever, in some of these interviews that, if it had come and if it had gone through the driver's side, it would have gone right through me. So he kept sort of making that point. But,
But even just the
my
impact of
friend,
the car crashing into this thing would seem like he would be, I don't know. I mean, I guess he didn't have airbags or anything, maybe, but
well, see, I think, my friend Adam Ruff makes a very, important point, I think, on this, and that is, he pointed this out to me, showed me a video of a rocket sled test, where they have a rocket sled hitting a car at 500 miles an hour, and it literally slices the car down the middle, right in half. And that's about the same speed as the plane was alleged to be going. So if a pole really did impale that taxi, we wouldn't be talking about a bench seat and a tiny hole. We'd be talking about the whole car being destroyed. It would have gone right through that car, and come out the other side probably. So whether, I mean, who knows if he would have survived that or not? But I don't even think that even matters. What matters is that the damage is just is completely impossible, I think. And just on your other point, I would agree with you. I would suspect, and this is an area, I know some people have looked at this probably a little more than I have, and maybe I need to, but I suspect that you're right, that they routed the traffic off of there in advance. I think that's very likely, because otherwise you'd have all kinds of cars, at least for a while, there would have been cars all around him.
there must have been.
And
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, if this actually happened, there would be people who saw this happen.
Not only saw
Right.
it, but probably been impacted by,
Right.
it looks like his car spun.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when you look at the length of that pole too, Lloyd is telling a story. So, he's trying to make it colorful and everything. But when you think about what are the chances that taxi could swerve around for a period of time with a pole sticking out that's probably like 4 times longer than the car, and it's just, why would it take him so long to stop? I mean, I don't know, maybe that's not right, maybe it does take that long. But then he gets out and thinks, and the first thing he thinks is, I want to get the pole out of there so I can drive home. I mean, the Pentagon's just allegedly been, hit by an airliner, and his first thought is, I want to get this cab home. It's just a
Did he
crazy
drive
story,
it?
I think.
It
Do you
wasn't-
know how? Sorry.
Sorry?
No, it was your turn. Go ahead.
That's okay. I'll finish my turn. I just wanted to ask, do we know, like, I'll look this up, but it would be interesting to see like how long this entire event took, like from the time the pole went into the car to the time that they got the pole out of the car. Was this like something that happened in 15 minutes, or like, that would be an interesting to look into.
Well, I mean, of course, I don't believe it ever was in the car. So so we're talking hypothetically here, but
Hypothetically, I mean,
his initial description was that he was, pulling the pole out with the other guy when an explosion took place at the Pentagon. Now, is that the explosion that we've seen in the photograph taken by a guy named Daryl Donnelly that looks that was apparently happened, somewhere around 9:40. So it would have been, well, maybe it wasn't 9:40, but it like a number of minutes after the initial event. So was he describing that? Maybe. So that would mean it was not very long at all. But then, as I said in the slide thing, he changed his story over time. Like, he starts off by saying he fell down because of this explosion, but then later on, he kind of forgets about the explosion and he just says, "Oh, and I stumbled, the weight of it." And so that's a bit weird. But so it doesn't seem like very long. It doesn't seem like the whole thing is even supposed to have taken very long.
So the pole came out of his car, like, I'm sorry to elaborate this, but the pole came out of his car like right after the accident, basically. At some point, they took the pole out of the car. Like, they didn't just keep the pole and everything there as like evidence or anything. They just took the pole out of the car, right?
No.
Yeah.
Well, again, I
mean, according to his story, not according to
his story. Yeah.
I'm not saying this is what actually happened. I'm just trying to. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
He's basically says, he got control of the car, pulled it to a stop right beside the original place where the pole started off, which I think is pretty funny also. He just kind of says he got out and then flagged down a guy in a white van and to help him pull the pole out. So it was pretty soon after, and
really,
and I think I don't know if people remember from what I said in the slides there about how weird it is that the taxi's facing the side of the road. And so if you really had a pole sticking out of that car, it probably would have gone right over to the shoulder of the road. So they would pull it out, and then they carried it all the way into the center of the lane and set it down perpendicular to the taxi. Like, why wouldn't they just drop it on the side of the road if that was even happening? Why would they carry it to the middle of the road? It doesn't really make any sense. And I think that's why it's yet another example of how the story just kind of doesn't hold up.
Thank you. Chris Bergier has his hand raised. Find your unmute.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you, Chris.
Oh, okay.
Hi.
So So according to the official story, the plane flew in a perfectly straight trajectory while hitting the 5 light poles, right?
Yep.
And then both Wayne Costi and David Chandler, who are professionals, I consider them professionals, would actually agree with that and support and argue for that the plane flew exactly straight after hitting 5 light bulbs, that the light bulbs didn't change the direction of the plane, right?
Right.
I mean, that's their position. So I would challenge you guys, anytime you see Wayne Costi and David Chandler in any meetings and you want to engage in them, please provide this very simple thought experiment. Ask them, say, assuming, what if the plane was coming in and then all of a sudden hit the rudder real hard? Would that turn the plane? And they would say, yes, of course it would, right? So the rudder is designed to turn the plane because it puts a turning moment on the central axis of the plane, the yaw axis, right? So how come the rudder can turn the plane, but impact with 5 light poles can't turn the plane? Because when the light pole hits the wing, it's going to put a much higher moment yaw reaction on that plane than just the rudder, which is relying on the wind. The air is pushing the rudder compared to actually a physical object way afar that's pushing the wing. So how come the rudder can turn the plane but the light poles can't? So and anytime you guys see Wayne Costi or David Chandler, just propose that that thought experiment and then see how they react to that.
Yeah, I would add to that, Chris. I would say if you do get that opportunity, ask them how given that Lloyd says on 7 or 8 occasions very, very clearly that it was the long base of the pole, which is the first pole that hit his cab. How can they claim that it was not that pole, but it was the small part of the second pole? Well, I know actually David Chandler's already responded to that by saying, well, he just made a mistake. That's his
Right, right, right.
explanation.
But you can't make a mistake. I mean, they acknowledge that the poles came in contact with the wing, and as soon as that happens, it wants to
Well,
twist the trajectory of the plane,
yeah.
right? But
I
according to
agree with you.
right, right, and I mean just as the rudder does, the rudder.
Yeah.
When you gauge the rudder, it twists the trajectory of the plane. So if you were to ask them if the rudder would twist, they would say yes. But then if it impacts with a light pole, they would say no. So right there, that's inconsistent physics, you know.
Yeah, I would just say that I guess I don't think I have quite the knowledge to make the comparison with the rudder that you're making. I'll take
Yeah.
your word for it. It's not something can feel I can make that comparison, but I think I can make the statement that the idea that an aluminum wing, even if it has fuel in it, which I think David Chandler has made the point that, well, it would have had more weight because of the fuel, and therefore it would have stood up better. But the idea that a plane going that speed can hit 5 poles with no damage to the wings just seems, and the plane not sort of tumbling off course, just is not credible to me. And I think since he's often talks about kinetic energy, I would want to know how could the poles not damage the wing and yet not be knocked any distance away from their base? How would they just fall over with an impact at that speed? I would argue, even though I'm certainly a layman when it comes to physics, I would argue that doesn't add up.
Yeah, and it's certainly not going to turn the pole into a candy cane shape, into a nice radius shape. You only get that with a pipe bender. They have these benders. Like if you ever look at a roller coaster, you see how the tube is all bent in certain ways. So you can take a piece of very large diameter, like 6-inch pipe, and you bring it to the certain type of fabricator. Well, the certain type of fabricator, they put it in a pipe roller and they roll it back and forth, and they get that nice shape. That shape isn't what won't result on a pure reaction from hitting the top of the pole. It's not going to bend. It's just gonna snap at the bottom. You know what I'm saying? It's not going to have a nice candy cane bend to it. So that's another point too.
Right. And I've seen too, I don't know if anybody else has seen this, but there's an old, I guess a test film that you can find somewhere on YouTube that shows a plane, and this is obviously back decades now, but a plane being crashed into the ground, I guess as a test, and there's a wooden light pole in the way as the plane is kind of hitting the ground and starting to break up. And when the wing gets to this wooden pole, and this is going much slower than 500 miles an hour at this point, it just slices the wing right off, like as if it's butter. It just slices it. It doesn't seem to do any damage to the pole at all. So the idea in this case that you've got 5 poles and no damage to the wing, that's not credible to me.
Yeah, I'm also so someone could simulate this without spending a lot of money, like a few $1,000s. They could make like a 6-foot wide plane and then put some light poles up and simulate that and show it. It would absolutely rip the wings off before it would do damage to both. It can't do damage to the light pole and then not do damage to the wing. Both structures hitting each other have damage.
Some's got to give.
Yeah.
So Jean and Sandra have their hand raised.
Yeah, I've got something, and Jean's going to follow me. Actually,
Okay.
I mean, since I raised my hand, some of the points have been already touched on. So, I think what I'm trying to piece together is, and you showed a lot of pictures, and some are from the day of, and some are taken late. Like I'm kind of like drowning in a little bit of that. But out of those pictures that were taken the day of, right? There were some pictures in there the day of, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what was striking me. It was like, okay, so like seconds after this happened, there was this huge explosion at the Pentagon, and the Pentagon's on fire, and there's mayhem and chaos and everything. Traffic would have ground to a halt. I mean, there should have been cars everywhere. There should have been people everywhere.
Right.
It's an absolute moment of something that's nobody's ever seen. And, people probably running towards the building, seeing if they can help. I mean, whatever. So in none of the pictures did I see a ton of people or a lot of cars backed up anywhere, or so that's, and I don't know, again, there were so many pictures. I'm not sure how many of them were really from that day. So I'm having, so that's kind of like what's troubling me. And I guess for the first time I'm wondering is did this happen that day at that moment, or is it something that was done at a different time and then presented as having happened that day? So that's,
Well, I mean, you can't, sorry, I didn't, were you still, I just want to comment on that.
Yeah, go
You
ahead,
can't
yeah.
rule that out, I suppose. But clearly, something is fishy about the fact that the road is empty.
yeah,
But I mean, my suspicion is that it's that they routed the traffic off of there, um, ahead of
not
time. Even if they did it
immediately.
after the fact, you'd think there would still be a lot of cars trying to get around
Yeah,
all of this. And would they even let them? Like, would
Right.
the authorities even allow that if under the
I don't know.
circumstances? You would, So yeah. Now I think the other direction, which would be northbound, I don't know if I mean, so there's a lot of witness accounts from that side of the road. This is a good area to look into, actually, about a lot of the people that describe where they were. How many of them were going northbound and how many southbound. But I know there were several of those USA Today employees who were going northbound because the USA Today building was north of the Pentagon. So, what's his name? Mike Walter, and there's several of them. Yeah, it would be interesting to find out from them, were you routed off the highway or what? How did that all work?
Yeah, no, because I mean, I just look at, your regular average traffic accident on the Met, and, even if it's on the westbound side, well, the eastbound side is backed up just because of the onlooker, even just for that, and the road's not even closed, right? So anyways, that was just kind of like an observation that was just
And-
playing with me. But I guess my
just to
my
throw, sorry to interrupt you. Just a quick thing I would say, just so that it's clear in terms of what I understand, the date, the times, all the pictures where you see the highway are at least supposedly taken that day. Like there's nothing, unless we're making we're theorizing that maybe they sort of took it in advance and
Mm.
somehow, but the only pictures that were shown that were not taken on 9/11 are the ones where I showed the damage to the taxi, the internal damage, and the
Yeah.
dashboard and all that. All the other ones were taken, that morning.
Okay, all right. So I guess my question is like, why? Like, why is that? Is it just to put a human face on the official story? I mean, what would have been the point? I mean, you
Point
think
of
that a
him
plane hitting the Pentagon, that alone should have been enough of a story. Why even bother with something as quote unquote insignificant as this?
Well, I think it's pretty significant in the sense that what it does is if people buy it right off the bat, and he's out there doing interviews pretty soon after, if people buy it right away, then perhaps they're not going to ask some of the questions that they might otherwise ask. Like, as I've the CIT guys showed that there are a lot of people that describe that plane being on the north side of the gas station, including William Legacy, the Pentagon cop, who from where he was standing at the gas station couldn't even have seen it if it was on the official path, because the
Right.
station itself would have blocked his view.
Right.
So this has the effect, I think, of just reinforcing the things that the official story they want reinforced, which is the flight path. People, when they say, well, of course we know the cab got hit, so the flight path has to be over there. So the flight path, the wingspan of the plane, because in order to hit the 5, it can't be a small plane, because it's got to be. I think Massimo Mazzucco looked at this and found that that it would have to have been at least an 85-foot wingspan in order to hit all the poles. So it achieves that. It kind of confirms that the plane is low enough at that point. Whereas in reality, I would suspect, since I don't think it hit the building, then I think it wouldn't be as low as it, you know.
Yeah.
So it's there. It kind of it's there, and I think I make the point in the presentation that it's like one of those things that if it hadn't been challenged by anybody, it probably would have been accepted. It would have done its job if it hadn't been for Craig McKee and Aldo Marquis getting on a plane and going across the country and interviewing him, because it's only when they interviewed him that all these inconsistencies started to become very obvious. When you get like a local TV reporter, doing a 2-minute interview with the guy, they're not challenging him. They're not questioning any of the details. So
I think that's
I think it was sort of important. It's just another little detail, and he's kind of, he's a sympathetic looking character.
Of course, absolutely, yeah, very lovable.
So yeah.
It's important to say that you had the media. It's like a piece to present to the media. So the media is not just around interviewing the people who actually saw something else. You present. Right. I think they must have had that that's a speculation on my part, but they must have had that in mind, that they're going to present. I was a newspaper reporter, so the easier interview that you're getting handed on a plate would be like probably something you're going to go do.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be a great interview. Yeah.
I'll just let Gene go ahead with his question.
You can come back to me if you guys would like. And I know Owner's had her hand up for a long time.
Okay.
Who had her hand up?
Owner. The name is Owner, I guess. Just real quickly, you did a great job in the presentation, Craig. Appreciated that very much. Probably another reason why they don't want to release the cameras around, because if they saw people staging all this evidence, that would be another good point. But I want to talk about the flyover path, but I want to do that at the end because I'd like to hear people to keep it specific to Lloyd England. But
sure.
Good job. Thank you.
Thanks.
So I had a couple of questions.
Oh, Mary Maxwell's she doesn't know how to raise her hand electronically. Can you wait for Mary first, Al?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to run and I'll be right back. Okay.
Okay. All right. Mary, go ahead.
She has to unmute.
Unmute yourself.
That might.
Find your unmute button.
You might be able to do it from the participants menu.
Oh
no, she got it.
There you go.
How about that? Okay. First, Craig, that was really terrific. And I'd like to know how many years you've been at it, just the Lloyd cab thing.
Well, I have to give, thank you for that. And I have to give, the credit mostly to the two guys that went over there and interviewed him live, in 06 and 08, because they did videos where, that have all the interviews. So that really put everything on the record, and that made it possible. So what I decided to do, and the reason I wrote a two-part article about it was that I wanted to kind of get all of the stuff that they'd put into these videos and kind of put it all in one place so that it could be easily, digested. And then I guess there were some things that in doing it, there were some aspects of it that I came across myself, and like the scratch in the road. I think I saw that somebody else had shown that, that photograph. And also, I'll have to say one thing that I do have to say that was, I think was original from me. So much of it was those guys, and that was the whole idea of the right wing of the plane. How could the right wing of the plane knock the pole to the left side of the plane? How could it get on the other side? Because that really just destroys the whole story, So that I think, so I guess I was able to add a few things and I've been, so to answer your question, I guess the two parts, I've been writing about Lloyd England probably since the early days of my blog in 2010. And I'll tell you a quick thing. This was one of the things that got me on to the fact that there were people who are not being honest in the movement, because I was looking at forums and I was seeing so many people talking about like how terrible it was that these CIT guys were so mean to this poor, nice old man, Lloyd England. And, you know, he just was so nice and he was elderly, and how could they be so rough on him? And I even back then, when I was just at the beginning, I guess, of learning about 9/11, I was just a student at that point, reading a lot of David Ray Griffin books and things like that. When I read those things and it kept happening, I thought, doesn't pass the smell test. Like, people that are supposed to be 9/11 truthers that are trying to get at the deception of this story, and they're more concerned with whether they were polite to Lloyd England than they were with the truth. So the Lloyd England thing, I guess I started studying it and following all the developments going right back to 2010, I guess. And then the two-part thing, I think I wrote in around 2018, around there. So
I'm very interested in the lie as a lie. For example, if I were either prosecuting or defending someone and they changed their alibi, I would just say to the jury, well, that settles it. One day he said he was at his mother's house, and the next day he said he was downtown shopping. What more do you need? So in regard to the way you've presented it, I wish you would put it together under the heading, a staged event is a staged event, period. Start with that, and then show the lies against it, which is much what you did tonight anyway. Now, in my own life, I'm not much of a 9/11 girl, but I have recently changed two of my books, one is on Sandy Hook and one is on Boston Marathon. I have changed them around to say, like what I just said, hey, jury, just listen to this one thing. And if you can't come back at it, then, I win. So my Boston book is now called Stop Lying About the Marathon Bombing or Else. And
I like it.
The one for Sandy Hook is called The Human Mind, MIND, and Sandy Hook's Unreality, in which I really just talking about why is it that people would accept junk? And then you have to list the junk. But I mean, your case is so clean, and the man really gave it away when he said it's all about money.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I kind of wish that the two guys interviewing him had pressed him a little more after that statement. Like, I would have asked more. I would have wanted to know, like, what do you mean by that exactly? It's kind of left a little bit kind of mysterious and cryptic, but it certainly doesn't sound like, I just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and these terrorists were doing this event, and it doesn't sound like that. Why would you describe, like, as you just pointed out, why would you refer to money? That's not usually how you describe terrorists, as being in it for the money.
Thank you.
Okay, Alfred has his hand raised.
Yeah, couple of questions. Do you have videos of the interviews with Lloyd? I don't recall seeing them or where to find them, but
Yeah.
that would be interesting. The other question I had, what Sandra brought up anyway, was what happened to the southbound traffic, and why is that car all alone, and when was that photograph taken? And then did anybody ever ask the question if he had called into his dispatcher? I mean, he's a taxi driver. I would have thought if that had happened, there would be a record of him calling in. And there's a lot of questions that nobody's done any heavy investigation on. And so it really calls for a lot more detail than we're getting, or unless somebody has it somewhere. I don't know how you find it.
That's a good question, and that's not one I had thought of, or certainly not recently, and I don't know the answer as far as that. But I bet you somebody has raised it, because I know that CIT they're not active. They haven't really been active since 2013, but they do have a forum, and there's, a lot of people got really into the depth, the deep evidence and discussed it and shared information, for years. And so I'm quite sure somebody has raised that, but I don't know if they had a resolution of it. What's weird about the whole story, because he leaves the cab there, like he says he takes the pole out because he wants to take the car home, but then he doesn't take the car home. And there's a whole thing that you can see in my article where he talks about being, having a sort of a disagreement with a police officer there, and then he decides to walk home, and he bumps into some guy, and they decide to commemorate the whole thing by taking a dollar bill and ripping it in half, and each of them taking half of the bill. That just seems like a kind of a bit of color added to the story to me. It doesn't seem very believable. But I think the really peculiar thing is when he says, well, the FBI just assumed I was dead. That's just a weird thing to say, because there's no body in the car. There's no blood in the car. There's no damage to the driver's seat. Why would it doesn't really make none of that makes any sense. It all sounds like a made up story. And what was this? What was the second thing that there was something that I was saying yes to it, but I can't remember what.
Called into his dispatcher,
No, before that though, you said something else.
What happened to the southbound traffic?
Yeah,
that
he
car
wanted
shouted.
you to send him the videos of the CIT interviews with
Oh, the interviews. Yes. Okay. Right. Those are, definitely those CIT has done. I list them in one of my slides there. One of them is called, the first one they did was called The First Known Accomplice with a question mark. And they made the point that we're not saying he's an accomplice, we're asking the question. And then when they went back and interviewed him the second time, they did one called Lloyd England, and his taxi cab, the Eye of the Storm, I think it's called. And then they took sort of highlights, I guess, from the interviews and put them into their main film, which is National Security Alert. But I can certainly give you links to those, Al. And like I said, if I had, if I was a little bit more advanced technically, I would have inserted some clips into this, but I didn't. But I certainly will do that. I'll tell you one thing that's interesting. One of them was on YouTube, and it had been flagged as hate speech because Lloyd is black, and they, so I mean that makes no sense, of course, but that's YouTube, right? So it's hate speech according to YouTube. So, but I'll get you those links to the videos.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Craig, when you send me your PowerPoint, can you also send the links to the videos, and I'll share
Yes.
with everyone.
Yes.
Thank you. And Neeson has his hand raised. Find your unmute button.
Hello, good evening, everyone. So, go ahead. I'm glad you brought up the thing with the pole going from the right to the left side, like the left to right side. That really makes sense. But I want to know what happened to. Do we know what happened to the materials, and the debris, of the poles that was struck? Because if they were hit by a plane going at 530 miles an hour, there would be a residual material that would be imprinted on the poles because it's aluminum on wood, and that would be easily
They're not wood.
chemically tested.
They're not wood poles.
Oh, they're not wood. Oh, then the metal. Or even
No, they're
more.
metal.
So
Yeah.
it would there'd probably some melting point that would melt it into like paint. Second,
Well,
also this also confirms the second thing. If it was actually low enough to hit the pole, then that plane would have been subjected to what's known as ground effect.
Yes.
Yeah. So it would behoove is like, how would it fly such a straight speed at a constant at a constant level, after suffering ground effect level with an inexperienced pilot? I mean, it's incredibly difficult to do that with a professional pilot to fly at ground effect for that amount of time at that speed. I mean, especially with the constant push to continue to go up, flying at that level,
Right.
at that speed.
Right.
So
Yeah.
ground effect is airlift from the ground, right? Pretty much.
No, well, not
Yeah.
airlift from the ground. What happens is the difference of pressure that is from the ground to the pressure that's above it. So what it is a counterflow. It's the turbulence wake. The plane is in its own turbulence wake that it's
Okay.
creating, that's hitting the ground and bouncing back up into it. So the effect of the lift is multiplied, and also other multiple disturbances are on affecting it because it's like a ripple effect,
Got it.
right? Kind of like how you see it's best thought of if you think of rotor wash when you see a helicopter low to the ground,
Right.
but it's more of a circular motion going up and down rather than left and right, like just spinning around.
Right. Well, I think your point is very good, and I mean, there's also the question of it combined with that of how a plane could keep up a speed of 530 miles per hour right at ground level.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's that. Now, this is something that's worth noting that I may have mentioned in the one from last fall, is that the official flight path would take a plane right past a Virginia Department of Transportation tower that was, I think, 199 feet high. So the plane would, to be on the official thing, the official path, it would have to be above that, just a few seconds before impact. So this is a point that was made by Rob Balsamo from Pilots for 9/11 Truth, which is that if the plane is high enough to get over that tower, and it has to descend in order to be at ground level in time to hit the Pentagon, that the G-forces would be too great. So
That would be approximately 21 Gs.
Yeah. Now there's been the Chandler Group has disputed that, and it's not something I've unfortunately Rob Balsamo is not with us anymore. He could certainly address that question, but. And just to mention, I wanted to mention too, you mentioned about the poles and whether the material and the debris would still be around. I think it was CIT that did this, but they actually tried to get information about the poles after the fact, and they were not able to get anything. No, nobody had any knowledge of where they'd been taken or what had happened. They were able to go and confirm with the VDOT people the weight of the poles, which was 247 pounds. And that's when they were able to establish that tower would have been in the way of the flight path. But I don't know where those poles ended up. That's a very good thing. I wish I did know.
Very good. So Frank has his hand raised, but Frank, I think we need to circle back to Gene because he didn't get his chance.
Frank can go. It's all good.
All
I'll go
right.
after Frank.
All right. Frank, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Again, Craig, thanks so much for the presentation. And, thinking back over the years, for the last 22, 23 years, a lot of little incidents come up and indicate to me that the fix was in way back. They knew there was a problem, etc. I can give you a couple examples of that. We had a conference with the 9/11 Truth from the Berkshires in Connecticut. We had a conference in Hartford area, and Kevin Ryan was there. This is like maybe 6 years after the event. I don't know exactly. And I had the ability to drive Kevin back to the train he was taking back to Ohio, where he's living. And I said, "Hey, Wayne, what about, I'm sorry, Kevin, how about, the Pentagon?" And all. He says, "Oh, I don't want to go there." And I says, "Why don't you want to go there?" He says, well, I had some friends on the flight and stuff like that, and I don't think the families would like if for me to do that. That was his answer. I mean, I'm paraphrasing. So he did not want to go there at that point. So meanwhile, after that 6th or 7th year, they started the fermentation of the competing stories on the Pentagon. And so what we decided in Connecticut and Massachusetts and with the DC people, we decided to have a conference and invite both sides to be there and have a debate or as essentially a 9/11 conference. Lo and behold, we went down there, we scouted out the place, we found a hotel that was just in back of the naval, was it the naval building, right? Well, on the top floor,
Right.
they looked right out at the Pentagon. So the actual conference was, we're looking at the Pentagon. The problem is we couldn't get anybody at that point to try to defend the official story, which was nobody wanted to show up. And Kevin Ryan
Right.
couldn't give us any of his books to sell there, even though his books were not about the Pentagon. So this was already, we see what was going on. But meanwhile, at that hotel, when we arrived there, we talked with some of the young personnel there, and they said, well, what's going on here? We told them what the thing is about. I said, oh, right. You know, when we were here when that happened, and plane flew right over this and damaged all the aerials and the TV towers on top of the hotel, which means there was a north flight path, right? So about a year later, I confronted Wayne about that, and I said, what about this? He said, oh, they didn't know what they were talking about. So they already knew that there was a problem. They knew back then. And at this point, it hasn't gone away. CIT did their job, and they're in sort of a fix now. So they're really pulling all the plugs out. But I'm really surprised at the cast of characters that have joined that whole crew. I just don't understand that, because they're pretty good on all the others. On the other stuff, I guess that's to establish their bona fides. But still, this is the Achilles heel. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, well, thank you, Frank. And I think that's where we can apply what Margaret was saying before. You know, if people are good on a bunch of things, but then they take a position that's just absolutely indefensible and it's not even logical. You have to question everything they say. I mean, Kevin Ryan, you know, certainly he's gained his credibility with the World Trade Center, just like David Chandler has. But he's he posted a video one time, and I linked to it in one of my articles. It's like a parody video ridiculing the CIT guys, and he kind of comments, I think, at some point about how they might be government agents and I mean, I find him to be a problematic figure. I mean, he, in his book, Another 19, he says at one point that we should, for the purposes of, I forget how it's worded, but basically we should assume as much of the official story as possible, which is a very, very odd thing to say, I think. When you say you find it kind of surprising that certain people would be joining this group. Yeah, so do I. And I think what makes me frankly suspicious of this group is that they're pretty much in lockstep about everything to do with the Pentagon. They might disagree on different things, but as I demonstrated, I think in this, some of the things that they say are they're not defensible. It's not just incorrect. Like if you say if you say Lloyd England never said it was the long end of the pole in any of the CIT videos, a decade after the videos were made, and you've supposedly gone over them and analyzed them, I think you have to question whether that's a sincere statement. But, and I tend to be blunt about that, and I get myself into a lot of trouble with people because they think, oh, that's not being, I should just simply disagree with them. But it's very hard, year after year after year of watching these positions being taken and statements being made that just seem disingenuous and sometimes outright dishonest. It's very hard to keep treating it as if, well, I respectfully disagree with this statement. Like it's not it shouldn't be, if we're talking about complete sincerity, then some of the things I pointed out should have been corrected by now by them. They should have said, okay, we see now that, in the video that, yeah, he did identify the long end of the pole, but we just think he's mistaken. I mean, that's not I don't think that's a credible position, but at least it would be an improvement over continuing to pretend that he didn't say something that he clearly said over and over and over again. So, yeah, I share your puzzlement over that. I don't know if did I get the whole answer to your question? Oh, Frank's muted again.
Yeah.
We're good. We're good.
Okay, thanks, Frank.
Susan, may I share my screen real quick?
Sure.
All right. Let me know when you see something.
I see it.
Okay, so this actually isn't the main reason, but I thought it's a pretty cool video. There's the camera. So Sandra and I both have a FOIA request for cameras 1 mile within the Pentagon. They want to charge us $28,000 or $24,880. But
Jesus.
this is a pretty good. In this picture, you see the camera pointing at the Pentagon. What's really interesting here, this is the VDOT camera. This is the image from that camera. And what Craig's telling it, this is where the pole was. It definitely would have seen what happened there, but they won't give us any of these videos, which is highly upsetting. So this is really the reason I wanted to bring it up right here. This is where he's talking with Lloyd. There was that overpass signs. The camera's on top of that. So it would have clearly seen everything happening. But my reason for asking my question with Craig, I think we brought it up the first time. It was the flight path. Have you ever considered, and I think you kind of were thinking about it. Here's the flight paths as we know them, the southern flight path, the northern flight path. But what I was interested in was if we follow the trajectory that Craig is proposing, if there was a flyover, and if you follow that route, it kind of leads right towards Reagan International Airport, right in line with that runway.
With the landing strip. Yeah. We thought that was pretty interesting. That
Yeah.
the perfect place to,
Well, you'd think you'd want to get that plane landed pretty quick. I mean, that would seem to be a perfect way to do it. I mean, I haven't circled the Pentagon. Like I know some people that have gone down and really driven around it and whatever. Well, including the CIT guys did a video on it, but apparently from a lot of the highways going around it, it's difficult to actually see the building. Like it's kind of lower than a lot of the surrounding roads. Not this road, but the other highways.
Oh.
So there's an assumption made by a lot of people, perhaps, that, well, everybody would have seen a plane flying over. But I'm not sure that's I'm not sure that they would. And also, if you see a plane sort of descending right near Reagan Airport, and then you see a massive explosion at the Pentagon, I'm not sure you're going to immediately think, well, was that plane supposed to look like it hit the Pentagon?
Right.
You would kind of be focused more on the explosion, I think, than on a plane that kept going. A lot of times you'll hear people say that, well, nobody saw the plane continue, keep going or whatever. But of course, you have to have an occasion to speak to somebody that may have been in a position to see that. We don't know. Just like I can't say with 100% certainty that nobody saw Lloyd England, nobody saw the pole pulled out of his cab. I can only sort of assemble all the evidence and say that it's very unlikely. But you can't say no one saw it because we haven't spoken to every single person. Right. But I'd say the same thing about the flyover. Who knows how many people might have seen something. They may not have realized what they were seeing. Mm-hmm. And they may, you know, maybe that nobody interviewed them, and you know, they decided not to call into a TV station and share that information. It's, you know,
Yeah, maybe they
so I
saw
think
it.
the idea of a Reagan landing sounds very enticing to me.
Yeah. I mean, and maybe they saw it and, you know, they just, you know, in the moment of the chaos of all of that, they just felt like I must be seeing things, or just like not even,
Yeah.
you know, the point that I made in my article in the Pentagon was most of these people already knew about the towers having been hit. So now they're in a situation where they see a plane flying very low towards the Pentagon. I think the expectation is almost that it's gonna hit. So when you see the explosion, you kind of
Right.
connect that in your brain, and in that cloud of fire and smoke, would you even see if a plane kept on
I mean,
going?
we're
Right?
right near Reagan International Airport. There's planes coming in and out of there all day
Yeah,
long. So
yeah,
people
right.
really
Right.
wouldn't thought that much of it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyways, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Is it all right if I interject something? I was a newspaper reporter during, like, on 9/11 and after for a couple years, and 3 years or so. And I, you know, as a regular newspaper reporter, now I can't speak for people that are high profile, but like, you generally are really favoring like the official account of things. And if the official story is like tailored to provide you with material, a lot of people, there's not like really at the time of 9/11, there wasn't too much like real hardcore investigative journalism going on in the mainstream media already. Like, it was pretty much dead, and they were weeding everybody out and just like giving people early retirement packages and pushing people out the door. My entire bureau literally got fired or laid off or early retired, and I was the last person in this whole bureau. Like, I was sitting in the office a couple days a week alone. You were just getting handed like 2 people or 3 people's worth of work, and they would just see how much work you'd do. So if the federal and if you tried to write from the little guy's perspective and go around and interview, because I was like idealistic, you would just be like laughed at. Like, literally, you would end up like getting told off, like, stop doing that. And I'm not kidding either. I remember I wrote this, I won't go into a long-winded story, sorry, but like I could tell you examples. And you know, if they tailor various like witnesses to like just feed the media is just going to really go with those witnesses pretty much. Like, the mainstream media is been my experience anyway. You know, I mean, I can't speak
Yeah.
for anybody.
Well, I would agree with you. And in fact, I was working for a newspaper on 9/11 also. I was actually doing the layout of this. I was working for a weekly paper in Montreal, and we were already, you know, well along in producing our, because the paper came out on the Wednesday, and so we put it together on Tuesday. So we basically had to redo the whole paper that morning. And we actually stole a photo from one of the, you know, New York posters, one of the iconic photos of people running away from this, you know, the cloud of dust, you know. So we like we put it on the front page of our paper with, you know, with no you know, no fee being paid or anything. But anyway, that wasn't my decision. But
Yeah.
yeah, you're absolutely right. You would, and I think you would once the story kind of gets locked in, if you saw something different, you would just assume that you got mixed up, right? You would,
There was
like, when,
enormous pressure to just be
yeah,
jingoistic and patriotic and go with the story. Enormous pressure. Like, nobody stepped out of those boundaries. When I was at the Star Ledger, for instance, I was at a smaller daily paper on 9/11, but shortly after that, I went to the Star Ledger, and it was just enormous conformity.
yeah. It's almost like it would be to investigate would be to suggest that the story everybody's been told is not true, and that's, people just didn't want to hear that, did they?
No, it
Yeah.
wouldn't have been considered. Like, I mean, I had my suspicions and skepticism about various things, but I wouldn't even have ever even considered doing something like that at my job. Like, it would be like if you worked at a very, very conservative industry and you know, it would have been just some kind of very outlandish thing to do in the environment that I worked in. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty revealing for sure.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. This was quite enlightening. I'm looking forward to your sharing the PowerPoint so that I can share it with the rest of the group who weren't able to join us tonight. And hopefully we can get the video of this up sooner rather than later, but most likely it'll be later. Sorry to say, we have technical difficulties. So thank you again, Craig, for this
My pleasure.
very well thought out presentation, very educational. And
Thank you. And yeah, I appreciated all the good questions.
yeah, I think they were very good questions. All
Yeah.
right, we're gonna stop recording and proceed to our agenda items. Record, where is it? There it is. Nope, that's not it. There we go. Sorry.